Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Scrubbed In Show. I hope you've all been keeping well. This week we have with us another incredible guest. We have with us Dr. Krishan Ramdoo, who is the CEO and founder of TympaHealth, which I'm sure you've been seeing across the last few years. But they are a startup and the world's first all-in-one ear and hearing healthcare assessment platform. And the beauty of having Krishan on the show is we usually get software players, software companies, but this is something tangible, something you can really hold in your hand. So absolute pleasure having you on the show today, Krishan. How are you?
Welcome to the
Yeah,
show.
good. Thank you. Thanks, Abdul. Thanks for having me on.
Absolute pleasure. So there's a lot to discuss. You've had an incredible journey thus far, but we want to take it back to the very beginning. Tell us a bit more about the start of your career, the motivation to study medicine and become a clinician.
Gosh, that's getting a while back. But I guess the motivation for becoming a clinician, I guess everyone has their different, experiences and kind of people that have shaped their career. And for me, if I really look back, I guess taking it way back, I guess my dad came to the UK. He trained as a nurse, came in 1967, and I guess seeing him in healthcare probably was that first foray in me looking and saying, okay, this is a very rewarding profession. I could see, how he was helping people, and with anyone in life, like you have those inspirations at an early age, and I think that probably did start me thinking about it. I then went and did work experience, and I had multiple things which I thought I would look at, and actually it was either going down the healthcare medical route or maybe looking at kind of on a business side as well, like in finance. But actually healthcare was always where my heart was at. And I guess what was funny is when I went as a 15-year-old to do work experience for a vascular surgeon in Oxford, where I grew up, what was very ironic, almost 10 years later, or just under 10 years later, when I finished medical school, when you have to apply and you have to rank it, back and then you had to rank all the different jobs in the whole country, the job that I got was working for that same vascular surgeon.
Oh, wow.
So it was as if it was meant to be. So I think there were a few experiences that made me think about healthcare, and it was just funny that was the same surgeon that I followed as a budding kind of a medic.
No, amazing. Tell us a bit more about the med school experience. Did it live up to your expectations?
So I think medical school for me, it certainly did. I mean, I think any degree that you do, and medical school is a fun time. Like I think you build friendships for life. If I was looking at, when I was a medical student, what did I want to do? Essentially you want to make sure you pass your exams and you want to get through. And I think I did try to make sure that, all medics are very diligent anyway. I think most of us are.
Yeah.
And it did live up to expectations. I think I've got friends for life there. And I think having those experiences, I had a choice between going to London. So I was either going to go to UCL or actually Leicester. And it was funny, actually. I decided to choose Leicester, which was a great experience for me. But it was my cousin who told me to go there. She was doing law there at the time. She's now subsequently gone on to become global business affairs lead at Google. So she's done pretty well.
Wow.
Amazing. So it's a kind of fight in the family, or who's going to become the more successful, I guess.
Yeah.
And actually, it was the best thing, because what I liked about Leicester was, it was a more campus-based university. Lived with friends in halls, and my wife, who went to Imperial, she had a different experience, enjoyed it as well. But it definitely lived up to the expectations. And interestingly, all my friends who I stayed close to have all actually moved down to London anyway.
Oh, wow.
We're medics.
Amazing. If you could look back at your medical school sort of education now and the curriculum, right? In what way does medical school contribute or not contribute to becoming an entrepreneur, would you say?
I think if I look back at my time, I'm not sure whether it contributed to it. And I'd probably say there were more external factors that now contribute to me becoming an entrepreneur. But I think it's changing. I think it is changing. And I think the one thing which I would say, having spoken to some medical students now, is it's become much more accessible to think about entrepreneurship. And equally, even when I was, qualified as a doctor, was going through surgical training, thinking outside of the box was definitely not something that was common. And it would have been, really, you want to go and do that? And still, I had ENT consultants saying, oh, you're going to think about leaving. And then now, full circle. They're like, okay, you made the best decision
Yeah.
because of the impact you're having. But I think at that stage, when I look back at medical school, for me personally, I don't know whether it shaped that journey into entrepreneurship, but it certainly did shape my views on how we're building Timper because of some of the experiences I've had in medical school and then subsequently practicing as a clinician.
Amazing.
Definitely. So you mentioned about training as a clinician, ENT. Tell us how ENT became the specialty of choice. I find it extremely squeamish. I don't know why. Like I did like a bronc once. I saw like the book was. I was like, this is not for me. Tell us what drew you to ENT. And I know it's a super competitive and highly sought after specialty.
It was actually quite straightforward for me. I think I had going through medical school, as I said, I think you wanted to get to the end and you wanted to and then only when and it's very, I think anybody will tell you, being a medical student to then becoming a doctor, completely different. And I was in my F2 year and I did a rotation in ENT and I always enjoyed ENT. I thought it was interesting, but I wasn't still sure which path. I knew I was thinking going down the surgical route, but I knew maybe general surgery wasn't for me or that type of specialty. But what really clicked for me was after doing that ENT block. One, I had a great consultant who I thought was very inspirational. I had a great reg as well, who was equally he's a bit more junior reg as well, so there wasn't so much of a gap. But fundamentally, what drew me to ENT was the fact that I found a specialty that I didn't mind going and reading about after work. And I think if you've got something like that, anything you're passionate about, you're going to end up enjoying it. And I think that was what that actually drew me to ENT the most, and also some of that positive encouragement. So, that reg, that ENT consultant I worked with said, actually, you know what, Chris, you're not bad at this. Have you thought about applying for core surgery to then obviously go on to higher surgical training? So, that was, I think, when you find something you like reading about, it makes it easier to absorb.
That's interesting. It reminds me of the quote, pursue the things that seem like play to you, but feel like work to others. And that's where you kind of go into your stride. Tell us a bit more about the training itself, because obviously, surgical training in this country is tough and rough. How was your experiences with it? And, if you had any obstacles, how did you overcome those obstacles while training?
And I think it's the same for any specialty training. There's some that are more competitive than others, but equally they're all competitive. And the way that I approached it, and I think it is, which I think still is true now. And I still feel I'm still, young enough to have done it, but I was in practice for 12 and a half, 13 years, but still, I was able, I think you always got to look, and actually I could probably use the same analogy when we get there, or kind of the next stage as actually becoming a founder, is thinking, well, which founders have gone to the next stage? So you think, well, I want to get to that level. So what I was able to do was look at kind of those SHOs who had got into core surgical training. Next stage, look at those registrars who had just got into reg training, and really follow their guidance. And I think finding someone who you can actually see they've done it, so how can I get to that next stage? And also, I mean, there's no rocket science, so look at the person spec. What are the hoops you have to jump through? And I think medicine is still that way. And, I would hope that maybe in the future, there'll be some other parts of those point system, obviously, to get into training that are a bit more diverse, which I think is changing as well, so that you get acknowledged for some of the things you do outside of medicine as well, because that is the way healthcare is going, and certainly is the future of the future medic, I believe as well.
No, definitely. And I think there's a lot of points there we can kind of pull across. You were quite senior before kind of you did the transitions across to different specialty. Where you focused early on in your ENT training just solely to kind of become a consultant, where does kind of TympaHealth come into this? Was it something you were sitting on, thinking about? Tell us how that kind of fit into your journey.
Yeah, I mean, you're definitely, and then you're always on that path to get to the end. And I kind of said that twice, like that. Where are you always heading, and making sure you're moving in the right direction. And I had always kind of thought about different ways of, say, assessing patients and how they access care, because certainly in a surgical specialty, one thing which was frustrating was seeing a lot of patients who are waiting so long to see me as a specialist when actually they had something very relatively simple. And you do all this training. What do you want to do? You want to be able to operate really on the appropriate patients, and see patients who need your specialist experience. So I always had that inside me of thinking, well, I want to use my skills to the best of my ability. And at that early stage, I think when I was an early junior reg, I think the only way to get some headspace to kind of explore kind of technology, I'd always been interested in technology, was actually to be able to take some time like alongside. So that's why I kind of registered for a higher degree, so an MD, which then became into a PhD. What I was really fortunate as well was having the right people at the right time. So I had an ENT consultant who I was working with who also saw that and also created the opportunity for me to have some of that time to keep doing my day-to-day training, but also have some time to do some research, which allowed me to kind of explore some of those ideas as well. And I think that was really helpful as I really mapped out my career, because as I started seeing that I was developing things for Timpa and realizing that I wanted to change the way pathway is delivered, do it in a digital way, and was seeing some real tangible ways in which people were saying, if you develop this, there's definitely an opportunity. I think that only then made me, where I was going in one direction, think, well, actually, there's a huge opportunity for me here. And one of those early things, and I think this is definitely one thing to, if you're ever thinking about going down a different route, is obviously putting yourself out there into environments which you might not think you'll have an opportunity. And I was fortunate to, it was a while ago, it was like an AGM of a charity event, and just so happened in there was the managing director of Boots Hearing Care, Specsavers.
Oh, wow.
And I was talking about the future of hearing and how, I believe that it should change, and developing this technology as an idea. And they both came up to me after and said, look, if you actually develop this is going to be game changing for our sector. And I was like, oh, okay. And I didn't think much of it, but obviously there's definitely a need. And I think there's always these things which happen, but you've got to create your own luck as well. And you've got to be there to be in front of the right people at the right time.
No, definitely.
Krishan, so a little bit about now the development of this, right? So we always speak to a lot of tech entrepreneurs, right? And there's loads of tech platforms where you can just build the idea that you have in your head. You've got a device, right? If someone's sitting there now with an idea that is physical, how do you bring something like that to life? Because that's not, in my mind, as easy as tech and software and so on and so forth.
Yeah, it's not easy, but I think there are ways to think about it, and particularly if the audience here is kind of medically focused, you can be the way I did it. I guess I won a prize basically, which gave some very soft, like £5,000 to kind of get some money to go and do, and that's the one beauty of being in training, is there are these kind of small pots of money, bursaries that you can maybe get. And so that was able to me kind of think, well, how do you get this proof of concept idea as well? And I obviously had a consultant who was supportive of that as well. And I think it's really important. I think new age consultants are very much like that. It was develop a proof of concept. Proof of concept was like, okay, how do you solve for, at that point, it was like a wax removal tool. From there, then managed to win another prize to get a little bit more funding to make it look just a little bit nicer. And I think from there, when you then go and raise some money, you've got to craft the story. And what's helpful with the hardware piece is having that something that someone can feel, look, touch. And it just helps them visualize, okay, I can see this being in this domain. We've got the bones here of something. I think when you do go and raise money, I think that was very helpful for us, that someone could feel and go, okay, I completely understand what he's trying to sell here.
Definitely. And I want to talk about fundraising in a moment. Tell us a bit more about the actual developing, manufacturing the device itself. Was it something, a prototype you made, the Steve Jobs style in the garage, or did you have to go to like a manufacturing company? I'm interested in dissecting that bit.
So in the first stages, I was able to kind of collaborate with an engineer at Imperial College, and just looking at kind of some ideas of just saying that this is what I'm thinking about, and that was quite helpful in just scoping out some designs. And then when I got a little bit more funding, went to a design house to really make it properly and put the bones of, if you then went to manufacture, how would you take it from a proof of concept to a manufacturing piece? And they were able to rapidly prototype some devices. So then following that, when you're at that stage where you have your proof of concept, you can see that actually you can do a feasibility study with it. Mm-hmm. Then it's the next stage of saying, well, I need to get some capital to actually go and manufacture. And that was at the stage where we raised our first million. And that was a juncture for me at point saying, yeah, someone's funding you £1 million here. Are you going to continue going down this route, or are you thinking of actually another route? And that's where we were able to then take those designs to a contract manufacturer, then obviously go and build and scale. And actually, in the first stage, we actually kept it very much in the UK because we were still low volumes. Mm-hmm. But what we had done is get the right building blocks of how then you would want to scale it to an actual factory. And with that money as well was looking at the regulatory landscape. I think it's really important in a medical device space to make sure you know where you sit, because sometimes if you know that you can sit within a class 1 medical device, then making sure you don't fall out of that window, which is what we made sure that we did.
Definitely. Amazing. Just before talking about fundraising, at one moment in that journey, you obviously flipped specialties. Tell us, was this the point when you thought, do I pursue ENT surgical training? Do I switch? Do I leave the profession altogether? So tell us about the rationale. I can imagine maybe a few sleepless nights as well, right?
Yeah, it's a really difficult choice, actually. And it was a real moment in time. And I think one of the things which helped decide that, so you've got this term sheet or check that's coming in for, a large amount of money. You're then saying, okay, there's some real opportunity here. And for me, obviously, I knew where I wanted to get to kind of in ENT, but I asked a few of my consultant colleagues, and they said, you know what, you don't want to look back, Krishan, 5 years' time and think, you know what, you missed a huge opportunity, because there obviously is one now. And I think when you get the support of colleagues, and granted, not everybody, they were like, what are you doing? You're mad. You should just get to the end. I think the ones are true and can see, not that those guys weren't being true that said no. I think those that could see the potential, and also then speaking to people outside of medicine, was helpful in me thinking, okay, let's switch away from ENT. But what I did then wasn't actually leave medicine, because my heart wasn't ready to leave medicine. I switched into GP training. So I went from like an ST6 to a GP ST1. And you can imagine a complete game change in terms of what you're seeing. But for me, it was a kind of means to an end. And I remember having that conversation with my wife, and she was like, well, if you think you can handle it. And I think you've just got to be, as for me, I'm a very, relatively goal-focused individual. So I knew that where I wanted to get to, and this was part of that. And I think with all those things, you've got to take away your ego as well, as being like, I'm now an SHO. What does it matter? You just got to get on and do the job. I think that was that was one moment in time of saying, okay, I'm going to do that. And I think it was a bit easier to manage kind of starting and running a company with doing some of that GP training, because it was a little bit more flexible. And then I think the next moment in time was actually then making the choice to leave completely.
How hard was that bit?
That I think was the harder. Well, I think they were both hard in at different times. And we then, I think the time when I left, we just raised, I think, another small amount of like 2.5 million. And at that moment in time, when you've got that amount of money, I think you've got investors there saying, well, Krish, as well, you've got to be fully committed. Yeah. And that wasn't actually, and they weren't pushy on that, because I was still getting things done and doing the milestones which I said we would achieve. Yeah. But equally, then you've got a workforce here who you're still working as a kind of full-time doctor. I had 2 children at that time. Trying to finish writing my PhD is just too many spinning plates. And I think if you want to, I still only got two children. 2 children stopped. I think if you're going to do anything well, you've got to dedicate your time to it. And I think fundamentally, if you've got kids, you've got a business to run, something has to give. And equally with that time, I was able to maybe even in my own mind, de-risk it in my own mind. saying, hey, this can become what I've always believed it can become. And then obviously then that was then the decision to be like, okay, let's go full time. And actually that was just over 3.5 years. And now you can see the company's really been on a really good trajectory.
Talking a little bit about now your journey to sort of making that full-time switch now, right? I want to talk a little bit about the investment of hard work. Not enough people, I think, talk about how hard it is and how much time people put in. So you've talked about you had 2 kids, a PhD, you were working full-time as a surgeon till ST6, then you became a full-time GP trainee. Talk us a little bit about what it was actually like. How many hours were you spending a day on work? How many hours were you sleeping? How many hours were you at the gym? Give us an idea of what it was actually like for you.
Yeah, I mean, incredibly. I think it's all trying to be about balance, and I think without that, and I still say that now, I think when it was trying to balance 2 jobs, it was kind of working full time as a doctor, come home, put the children to bed, and then working like till midnight, until the next morning. And for me, kind of my balance is trying to do some exercise, and I inherently just wake up very early before the children wake up to do some exercise, whether that be half an hour. But I think there's some good, you hear all about these things, and you've got to find that thing for yourself, which gives you that kind of closed off time. And I think it is challenging. And even now, though, like, you've got a company to run and you've got to build that structure. And I'm definitely not the best at it, because I will be like, yes, let's get this meeting in at this point. Let's get this meeting in at this point, because you want to kind of to put 100% and 200% into your business, because you also look at it from a lens of, well, look what I have, you could argue, given up to now pursue this. And the balance, the day to day, it's I think you want to try and be good at everything. You're never going to be able to achieve that. And I think what I'm trying to kind of work towards is kind of, well, I know what my superpowers are. Where can I get people to support me in those bits that I need help with? And for them to make that superpower. And then I think the balance comes with kind of family, and, everyone has their own motivation and drive, which I think is a real right thing. You need to know what makes you wake up. You want to be passionate about what you do, but why are you doing it as well? And I think me trying to balance that alongside then, trying to look out for some time for myself. It's challenging. Whether I get it right all the time, who knows?
Well, I can say one thing: the gym is going well. You are filling in your shirt very well. I can see the gym is going well. You mentioned superpowers.
I think it's the lighting outdoors.
You mentioned superpowers. Tell us what your superpowers are.
Okay, well, it's always difficult to kind of think about yourself. It's always better for someone else to say that. I think one that I always have, and I think that's also in medicine as well as working, now having run Timpa, is listening. I think you're never going to have all the answers, and being a single founder, you've got to surround yourself with people who have also been there and done it. And I think being able to listen and not have that ego around you saying, no, my way or the highway. I think you've got to be able to listen and then take a balanced approach. And I think that's where medics, I think if you're looking at transferable skills, what do we need to do? We need to absorb information, take that information, and then make almost a decisive decision based on that. And I think that has certainly helped me in the journey that I'm going on. And I think that definitely is one of my key skills. The other, I think, is communication as well. I think in order for you to scale a business, you've got to be able to kind of communicate your mission and vision in different ways for varying people within the organization, as well as to investors. And I think that, again, transferable skill. What's the first thing they teach you at medical school? Communication skills. And I think being able to exceed at that has certainly been helpful in as we've grown the company now. And I think you would ask the people in the company. I think everyone is very clear on what our mission and vision here is at Timpa, to kind of democratize that ear and hearing healthcare journey, not only in the developed world, but low income resource countries as well.
I think it's incredible. And I think one of the key traits for founders is the ability to listen. You mentioned kind of the different rounds of funding investment. Tell us a bit more about the actual process, because a lot of our listeners are health tech founders and operators that are looking to fundraise. I think to date, you've raised over $30 million. Tell us about the process, some advice to founders. And for the other listeners who are thinking, why on earth do you need $30 million? So, tell us how you do it and how you spend the money.
Well, I think each stage of funding is very different. And I think now, having done it a couple of times with two relatively recent large rounds with 8 million and then 23 million recently, I think at each stage you've got to be very clear on kind of what you just said, like what are you going to do with the money? Because you need to be able to articulate, I'm asking you for some money and this is what I'm going to spend it on. This is what it's going to be. This is what it's going to do for the business. And I think what I've tried to be very clear in those funding rounds is make it very easy for people to understand what you're going to use the money for. Because actually, if you go too far down the line and say, actually, we're going to develop this platform that's going to do X, Y, and Z, investors are smart. They will know that it's going to cost so much money and you're not going to be able to develop that in that phase. I think you've got to show them the roadmap, but then actually be very clear and definitive about what you want to spend that money and what you will. I think they're also very, as you raise money, it's at different stages. Like as you get more mature, it then becomes a little bit more based on numbers. In the early stages, it's probably on product development and making sure that you become laser focused. And in the early days, at that kind of pre-seed seed round, I think we did some of our rounds without even people knowing we existed. It was just really just focus your mind. For me, it was product, like get product right. And then only when we did our seed round and Series A, we actually came out of the woodwork and we were in Boots without people even knowing it was Timpa and Boots, because a lot of people would have made a big song and dance about it, but it was actually, let's get it right first and use all our resource to get that product right. I think it depends on the stage, kind of how that process is. I think you've got to have a lot of conversations as well. And then how you spend the money, as I said, it at different, like for now, like what would be using the money? That's a lot of money, that 23 million. People think, you must be swimming in
minted,
it.
Right? You made the best decision leaving ENT,
behind
right?
I think there's a big difference between personally company, and I think that's sometimes you've got to explain that to people. It doesn't actually go into my bank account; it goes into his bank account. And the thing is, where our journey is now, it's like, how do we continue to grow within the UK? How do we scale within the US? And how do we continue some product development? And all of that, as you keep trying to innovate and keep ahead of the curve, it ends up becoming, because you keep going to the next level. So as you go to the next level, you're doing more things. So actually your burn becomes higher and you spend more money. So actually, I think at any stage, you will spend that money. And equally, venture capitalists want you to spend that money. They don't just want money sitting there, but they want you to spend it. And that's why I said it's being very clear on what you're going to spend the money on. You want to be as efficient as possible with your cash spend as well. I think it always bodes well to future investors of a cash efficient business.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So
definitely.
Apart from talking about capital now, I know investors also bring a lot of what they call smart capital now, right? What other things have the investors done for you? What things have they unlocked for Timpa as well?
We've been really, really fortunate. I've always tried to bring in investors who are going to be value add, and in our seed round had a fantastic array of individual investors. We had a term sheet from some VCs, but actually I chose that time to bring in some individual ultra high net worth individuals who can actually open doors for us. And they came. There was a group that came together in the US. So one of them is one of the founding investors in Facebook. We've got the ex head of Apple Health. We've got one investor who's a 5-time unicorn founder.
Wow.
There's not many of them.
I was going to say,
And I think bringing on, you've got to spend time speaking to all of them and understanding the mission and vision. And what has been good, and I think why I talk about kind of communication, is each one of them I've been able to build, a form of relationship with, so that actually if I've asked them, can you make this introduction, or actually we've got a lot of data here, like what's your view on how we can think about this and to make it meaningful. And I think it's looking for investors who can do that. And they've made incredible introductions. We have a great board as well. Our chairman as well, who's come on and equally, invested in the company, is how he was the chairman of the NHS and he stepped down as to come in as chairman of Timper. He has been instrumental in opening doors, but the key thing is with all of those, they can open the door for you, but no one is actually going to make it happen. And so you still have to be able to deliver on that. So you could be like, oh yeah, I'm going to bring this person on board and they're going to help me one way or another. It's still fundamentally boils down to you and your team delivering on that. And you can't, have any qualms to think, oh, someone else is going to do the work for you. I think you just got to know that you're on this journey and you've got to make it happen. And then when we bring on institutional investments, so like with Octopus who've come on, they come with a whole network support as well. And I think as a founder, you need to be looking for that, of which venture capital fund will support you. And they've been great for us. They've been really supportive in myself, as well as supportive of the team as well.
Amazing.
I think that's incredible. And I like the point of investors, advisors, they are able to open doors, but it still comes down to you to walk through those doors. And I think that's such an important point. I think it wouldn't make sense if we didn't discuss kind of the rise of artificial intelligence. And, you're seeing these incredible things, Microsoft, scanning your eye and telling you everything you can imagine. How does that help you in your mission with TympaHealth? And, how has it changed the landscape for hearing loss? Because I remember reading something like over $900 billion worth of costs incurred by, unattended hearing loss.
It's a huge issue. And I think the example you gave of the, ophthalmology, I think ears are probably 10 years behind the advancement they've done in eyes. And, everyone goes for an eye test, but actually you should be just checking your hearing at the same time. We're all sitting here with kind of headphones in, and, by 2030, they're talking about hearing loss overtaking diabetes and cataracts in the burdens. That's not just because of the aging population, but that's because there's also the bunch of us who listen to loud music. We have headphones in our ears every day, and, where the ears weren't necessarily built for that. And, those long-term effects will start to come through. Where we kind of sit with AI is that, to date, the technology has been used on more than 300,000 patients. We sit on the world's largest bank of ear and hearing healthcare images and videos with some associated health data. Obviously, we are bringing in a machine learning algorithm into that so that it will help from, as you just mentioned, like a non-specialist will look in the ear and the technology will tell you this is the diagnosis. And we're well on our way to do that. And actually, we will be launching that. And in actual fact, we've built those algorithms already. And what we have to do, why I talked at the beginning about regulatory landscape, is you can only run as hard as those regulatory bodies allow you to run, because you can't launch it until it becomes a medical device in its own right. And so we built that into our kind of pipeline of development. And so, as well as diagnostically, it would be great if we could sit here and say, okay, Abdul, you've come in, had your ears checked, you've got normal hearing today, come back in 5 years' time, and, something looks different. Is there a way in which we could have predicted something earlier? Like you see some of the changes in the eye. There's no reason why you can't think about that kind of for the ears as well. And I think some of that prediction health as well is going to be very important. Hearing loss, single biggest modifiable risk factor for prevention of dementia. There's obviously a lot of age-related hearing loss. So identifying that earlier will prevent some of those downstream issues. And I think Timper has a real opportunity to be, by making it more accessible, means that actually you can go and get your ears tested really quickly, 20, 30-minute appointment, just to say everything's fine, come back in a year. And I think slowly, mindset will change. And as I said, even as the next generation is starting to come through, if you're listening to with your AirPods and you're thinking, I can't hear very well, you'd much rather try and know that actually, I should put my headphones a little bit 10% lower rather than blast, whatever music you're listening to on the tube. So I think that's where AI is going to play a big role.
Definitely. I'm very conscious of my AirPods right now. I want to burn them.
I've noticed that Krishan hasn't got his in though, so he's not using any AirPods.
It's always a little telltale sign.
Krishan, tell us a little bit about the end users now. So the people who are training with your devices, right? When you first introduced it, what was their response? What challenges did you face? And what is it like now? Because I've noticed you've got Timper Academy, where you're training
Yes.
loads and loads of people. Talk to us about why the academy came about, how it came about, and what are you doing essentially with all of that?
The academy came about, I guess, and again, you can link that very closely to medicine. Like, when you're going through training, you need to be seen by your trainers as being competent in what you're doing. And I think for me, when I looked at kind of the landscape of people, first of all, if you want to kind of deliver a service which traditionally, let's say, was delivered in specialist environments and by doctors, how are you going to build a program which you can accredit non-specialists? They have to go through a process. And I think our training program, our training academy is the highest accredited training program in the country. And it's not just gone are the days of see one, do one, teach one. People who come on the training course, they all have to be at least in NVQ level 2 and above, kind of with healthcare experience. I think we're finding our sweet spot with the allied health professionals that should go through: pharmacists, nurses, nurse practitioners, optometrists, delivering the service. But they each have to go through a process. And those who, let's say, are outside of that remit, there are programs which get them up to that level. But what we're very clear on is that for someone who isn't safe to go through our process, we will definitely say, look, you're not competent, you have to go and see more patients. And our journey in a very short process is they have an online webinar, they then have a learning management system which they have to go through. So very much like when you go and do your ALS, ATLS, you've got to read that big booklet. It's a online program where you have to do the learning and the modules before you can come on the course. You then do the course, you then are observed. We have these Timper simulation heads, and then observed seeing yourself perform it on real patients. And only then you're signed off. And then they also have to have, because of the way the platform's built, it becomes your own logbook. So you can see how many cases you're seeing. So actually the academy, I think, was probably built on my experiences of a surgical trainee.
Yeah.
And that's why I always stand really behind that. We're not, and even when I sometimes say to the marketing guys, like, you see, it comes across, all these people are getting trained.
Yeah.
The messaging needs to be much clearer, saying like it's a proper academy. Like, you cannot go and deliver it without having passed the assessments. And the team is so good that the majority of people will go through. But one thing which is very clear is if you're not competent, then you won't go through. Very much like your ARCP. If you're not you've got to do some other stuff.
Yeah.
Definitely. When I first saw it, the fear was kind of the stories you hear in the aesthetic industry, right? You have these people buying Botox, doing fillers in the living room, and with the device, I don't know if there's a regulation in terms of who can buy it, but you can easily have someone buy it, a non-clinician, non-trained individual offering it, microsuction for earwax, and you end up with a catastrophe, and that damages the brand. And how do you prevent that when you're trying to build a culture, build a brand? And we know the value of brand.
Well, no one can buy a Timper unless they've been on the Timper Academy.
Very good.
So we don't actually. You have to be an accredited Timper provider to be able to use it. I don't think there's any that are out on eBay yet.
Nah.
You can't. And equally, the way the system works is that we are able to know who's utilizing the system, and if those users are not utilizing it, we can always reach out to them to say, is everything okay? Do you need more training? And equally, the way that AI works in the background, like if you start seeing some cases where, there's more blood, let's say, which is, is actually relatively rare. I mean, your users, I don't think will be able to see it, but actually I've got one here.
Oh, wow.
The way that we built it was the suction probe can't actually push through to damage the...
okay.
So we built it so that it actually has its own safety mechanism. So you can't actually perforate the eardrum with it.
No.
Which, again, you're putting it in the hands of non-specialists. You've got to think about all those things. And there are systems out there. You can buy them off eBay that say, look in the ear and buy these loops. And I've always been a big advocate to say, well, if you are going to offer that, you've got to put these safety measures in place. And I think there's some strict guidance we give on people, but it's a really useful comment, because actually maybe that is the perception that people have. We're training everybody and anybody, whereas actually that isn't the case.
No, yeah, it's very reassuring to hear. Hopefully this will be on video, so hopefully they can see the little, which would be amazing. Taking a step back and going back onto you, Krish, tell us a bit more about life of a CEO, how you manage the company, how you run it. And an interesting question I always ask, and I asked Ben from Sarah, was how do you prevent being pushed out and being in a driving seat? Because when you raise the tens of millions, sometimes they want to replace the original founder and operator with bringing someone a bit more experienced in. So keen to hear about that.
Yeah, I think it's always something that you think about, because you think, well, how you might think, how do I know I'm doing a good job? And that's not a CEO, that's like anybody. Like, if you're doing, how are you doing a good job? But I think, to answer the first point of how you run the company, I think the best thing is you've got to get the right people. I think what we've done here at Timpa is we've got a great senior leadership team, and a great team in general, like everyone who understands why they're here, what's the mission of the company. And certainly, as we've navigated kind of the UK company, and now we've got boots on the ground in the US, making sure the US team understand that same culture and values. And part of that, we've really invested in the US team coming and spending some time over here in the UK, so they can see how the company runs. And I think that's been a tremendous amount of help in making sure that the company is run at a point and people know. One of the key things that I asked for in the company is that you just expect everyone to work hard. And I think if we're still small enough, and we're getting bigger, but you're still small enough that you'll know people who aren't pulling their weight. And from a day-to-day perspective, it's trying to make sure that you kind of evolve in this kind of growth phase of the company, how you do delegate to others. And there's never going to be anybody in the company probably who's better at kind of selling the mission and vision of the company. And I think you've got to be able to, though, back your team to go and deliver as well. And of course, there's always going to be challenges which come, because fundamentally the buck stops with you anyway. You've got to be able to think about that and think, okay, well, how, if my role as the CEO is to keep the company moving forward, you raise capital to grow the company, it's making sure you stay true to that, and equally evolve into a way of taking some emotion out of it. Like, if you've got to make difficult decisions, you have to make difficult decisions. And kind of the theme, I guess, here in this podcast is similar to medicine. Like, you are making, particularly in surgery, some very critical decisions. And so one thing I have been, which is really, I'm very happy to do that, because I think that was in my training, to be like, well, you've got to make a decision to make this cut here or this cut here, and it's going to have a long-term consequence, and be able to think very quickly. So I have felt that has been something that's helped me. And in order of kind of to almost, like you said, like you asked others, like, how do you stay in the hot seat? The way to stay in that is to, again, it's getting the team around you. As the company gets bigger, I found that what I need to do is think, well, what is my real key skills? What am I really, really good at? And what am I good at that actually other people, there's no one better than me, because I'm living and breathing this company. And then fill the other parts which you are kind of competent at, but know that actually you are doing it because you're competent, but actually there's someone else who could really excel in that. Is then put that kind of, find that person for you there, find that person in another role. I think if you do that effectively, and hopefully so far it seems to be that's what I'm able to do. I think then as you would expect that then you become an effective CEO, because the CEO is almost like being able to, you're almost building a house. And one of my mentors said to me, it's like, what you've got to do is, of that vision of what that house is going to look like. What do you need to, you've got to bring in the best contractors around to make that happen. And I think that's what you've got to think about kind of as your team. But fundamentally, those contractors say, we think you should do this. You've got to make the decision.
Definitely. I like the example of the house. And I can tell you're a very effective CEO, but the passion to kind of change the landscape and kind of make hearing assessment accessible kind of shines through, for sure.
Good.
Amazing. I've got one more question about the team now that you've built over the years now, right? When you first started the hiring process, was it a case of you just brought in the friends around you? Or was, because the reason I asked that is because I was reading this article, and a lot of mistakes people make is actually that, where we're all the same people. We're all identically skilled. We have the same exact skill assets. And often down the line, you hit problems. Did you go along that same journey, or did you have the foresight to know which skills you needed to bring in? What was it like?
Yeah, so I didn't do that kind of with friends or family to come and help. I think I did it a slightly different way in the fact that I actually brought people in who had been there and done it a little bit. So like my first hire was my COO. He'd been involved in startups before. He'd been involved in some exits at varying levels. Some he would probably say some successful, some not so successful. But at least he'd been in that environment. And that was the first thing that I said, well, I haven't operationally ran a company. So needs to hire that. And I think I did that with someone who was a little bit more senior because it automatically then stepped up kind of the way in which the company was. And actually the leadership team have had some experience behind them. And now, like, we've got a good breadth. I didn't go down that route because at the end of the day, you do want, as you're scaling a company, you do want people to be pretty open with you saying, Krish, I don't think this is a good idea, or I think this is a good idea. And you also want folks who, any young company has ups and downs. So certainly having people in the company who understand this is normal, I think is certainly, it becomes a better influence than if you're all the same people, then you'll be like, oh yeah, no, this is a bad patch, this is a good patch. How do you actually get to the end? You might always find that you want people to challenge you.
Yeah, definitely.
No, absolutely.
It seems you built TympaHealth correctly from the ground up, from the hires, from the advisors who brought on, even proof of concept, testing it. It'd be interesting to know what you feel your proudest achievement is so far in the TympaHealth journey and what the future looks for you, where you're going.
The proudest moment is, and I'm sure a lot of people, when you get this impact, I guess, is the number of patients that the technology has been used on. I mean, if you're talking near 300,000 patients, I never would have seen that many patients in my whole medical career. And that is a huge impact already that's been making. We've done, where the company's heading, we've done a little bit of work in Cambodia. I think the big mission is like, how do you get there? How do you go and create a sustainable service out there for those low income resource country? And it is really possible. I think you've also got to be realistic in the fact that in order for you to do that in a sustainable way, you need to build a good commercial business as well. Because you won't be able to sustain otherwise.
No, I definitely agree. And it reminds me of kind of the Rwanda Babylon story, and unfortunately kind of a bit of a downfall on that. And I think a nice way to end the episode would be your advice to entrepreneurs who want to go out and build and commercialize a medical device as kind of like a digital health app or software platform. Of all the years you've been doing it, what advice would you give to them?
From a practical level, med device in particular, is really understand the regulatory landscape, because that regulatory landscape will always be underneath, and you will only be able to get things out at that moment in time when you are running those pathways. I think regulation is very important. And then I think from a more holistic approach is the resilience part of it. And that might be a cliche. I think people do talk about resilience, but as I said, any startup journey is without a doubt going to have its ups and downs. And I think you've got to think very clearly as to what is that thing outside of, because you will live and breathe this idea, and you will go to places and love talking about it to people. But it's also important to have an outlet that makes you have some headspace not to necessarily think about it, every hour of the day, because you will end up not having clarity of thought. So I think it's kind of resilience, having that out, and particularly in the med device software space, is that regulatory roadmap, because I think that having an eye on that will help you be ahead of the game and plan accordingly.
I think that's great advice. And that's, like you mentioned, practical advice. Krish, you are a super busy superstar. So it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show, sharing your story. I know we asked a bunch of questions covering it all to some degree. So thank you once again, buddy.
No, thank you for having me, both of you. Really pleasure. Real pleasure.
Absolute pleasure.